there's one kid in South Park who should have been in cuffs by now, it's Eric Cartman. Let's break down his worst and most offensive crimes. We cannot make this list without highlighting the darkest, most psychopathic act Cartman has ever committed, and all for one goal: Scott Tenorman must die. The episode opens with Cartman bragging to his friends that he's the first to reach puberty, presenting his first pubic hairs. But Cartman doesn't know that getting pubes means you have to grow them yourself. He only has them because he paid a high schooler named Scott Tenorman $10. Realizing he's been scammed, Cartman does everything to get his money back, but Scott constantly outsmarts him, forcing Cartman to beg for money, singing on camera that he's a little piggy. Despite all of it, Scott burns the money in front of him, and Cartman vows revenge. Cartman tries to train a pony to bite off Scott's penis, because that's his natural response to every minor problem. But he's advised by Jimbo that the best way to humiliate someone is to find their weaknesses and exploit them. Knowing that Scott's favorite band is Radiohead, Cartman dubs a video clip of them being interviewed to make it look like they're saying how much they hate Scott. But Scott one-ups Cartman by publicly showing a video of Cartman doing his song, humiliating Cartman. Cartman tells Stan and Kyle of his plan to get Scott's penis bitten off at a chili cook-off, that he wrote a letter claiming Scott has cancer to get Radiohead to visit and see him crying. But Stan and Kyle hate Cartman and decide to warn Scott in advance. When Cartman arrives, he gives Scott his invitation and a ticket for a pony ride. To undermine Cartman's plot, Scott tells his parents of a starving pony on an abandoned farm, convincing them to go and save it. And as for the chili, Scott cooks a pot intentionally contaminated with pubic hairs from all the teenagers of South Park. Gross. The next day, Scott and Chef bring chili for the cook-off, as does Cartman. Scott eats some of Cartman's chili, but Cartman greedily scarfs down Scott's, just as he does with basically every food put in front of him. Just as Cartman finishes Scott's creation, the truth is about to come out, but Cartman already knows Scott's big move. Cartman switched Scott's chili with Chef's at the last second, having known and planned for Stan and Kyle to betray him and warn Scott. His real plan was far worse than a pony bite. Cartman reveals that he plotted the events to get the farmer who owns the pony to shoot and kill Scott's parents for trespassing. While the farmer handled the police, Cartman stole the corpses, dismembered them, and cooked them in the chili Scott just ate. Scott discovers his mother's finger in the bowl, immediately pukes and starts crying. But then of course the members of Radiohead come along and, unaware of what just happened, make fun of Scott for crying. Finally, Cartman begins licking the tears of unfathomable sadness from Scott's face, while Stan and Kyle quietly agreed to never upset him like this ever again. Yeah, I take back everything I said about Cartman. He's not a loser, he's a great guy, I swear. Our next episode reveals Cartman's twisted prejudice towards people different than him. Usually it's Jews, but this time he's tackling the ginger kids, and it's a lot worse than you could possibly imagine. The episode begins with Cartman giving a class presentation filled with hate speech against ginger kids, claiming those with red hair, freckles, and pale skin are creepy, soulless beings suffering from a virus known as gingivitis. When Kyle points out that he has red hair, Cartman clarifies that he has no freckles. So he is not a ginger, he's a daywalker immune to the sun's effects. Cartman's presentation leads to increased discrimination against ginger children, infuriating Kyle. To counter Cartman's prejudice, Kyle gives a presentation explaining the science behind red hair. He even interviews a family with ginger children to prove that being ginger is a normal genetic trait. But even the parents of the ginger children display prejudice towards their own kid, reinforcing the idea that society hates gingers, or at least that parents hate their own children. Despite Kyle's best efforts, Cartman continues undermining him, using Kyle's daywalker status to question his credibility. Frustrated with Cartman's bigotry, Kyle, Stan, and Kenny decide to teach him a lesson. They sneak into his house at night, knock him unconscious, and transform him into a ginger by dyeing his hair red, bleaching his skin, and adding freckles. He's like a chubby little Annie. The next morning, Cartman is horrified, with his doctor even suggesting his mom put him down because he's now a ginger. Despite the drastic change, his mother refuses to take extreme measures, although she does consider it. Wouldn't you if Cartman was your son? At school, Cartman faces the same discrimination he incited, but instead of learning from the experience, Cartman shifts the blame onto society, arguing that ginger hair shouldn't apply to him because he was not a ginger from birth. He forms a ginger separatist movement, initially seeking equality for gingers, but quickly turning violent and extremist. He preaches that gingers are the chosen race, leading his followers in attacks on non-gingers, until he eventually calls for the eradication of all non-gingers. A kind of beigeification of South Park, a red scare. His ginger followers kidnap many of South Park's children, taking them to the Sunset Room at the airport Hilton, where they plan to sacrifice the children using a lava pit. As a daywalker, Kyle is chosen as the first victim, but before being thrown into the lava, Kyle tells Cartman that his ginger appearance was created by Stan, Kyle, and Kenny to teach him a lesson. Realizing the danger of being exposed as a fake ginger, Cartman quickly changes his tune on the whole thing. He claims to have had an epiphany, arguing that everyone should live together in harmony. To convince his followers, Cartman sings Hands in Hand, and the Gingers release the other children. As the Gingers and the rest of the kids join in singing, Kyle calls Cartman a manipulative liar. Cartman, unbothered, admits this is true, but is content knowing he has saved himself from being sacrificed. Bet his mom wished she thought a little more about that offer from the doctor now. Let's move on to our next episode, which shows just how good Cartman is with children, assuming those children are addicted to drugs and willing to fight for money. Crack Baby Athletic Association. The episode opens with Stan and Kyle watching Terrence and Phillip, when a heartbreaking commercial by Sarah McLachlan about crack-addicted babies prompts Kyle to volunteer at the hospital. However, when he arrives, he finds Cartman already there, which is obviously strange since Cartman probably usually only comes to the hospital for food and to laugh at the sick. Kyle follows Cartman and discovers that Cartman, Craig, Clyde, and Butters have formed the Crack Baby Athletic Association, the CBAA, a business that stages fights between drug-addicted babies for a ball filled with crack, with the fights being streamed online. It's MMA with more babies and less drugs. Horrified, Kyle confronts Cartman, but Cartman convinces him it's a win-win situation for everyone and ropes Kyle in to be the business's accountant, believing that Kyle's Jewish background qualifies him for the role. Kyle reluctantly agrees, although he struggles with his conscience, justifying his decisions to a silent and very judgmental Stan. But people love crack babies. The business thrives, and the group prepares to sign a deal with EA Sports to create a video game based on their sport. While Cartman insists the CBAA is a non-profit organization, Kyle becomes uncomfortable with selling the baby's likenesses without compensation. Cartman promises to solve the problem by investigating how other companies exploit athletes and get away with it. He goes to the University of Colorado dressed as a southern plantation owner and tries to gather tips from the university's president about how to treat student athletes, or slaves as he calls them. The president is offended, and Cartman leaves without any helpful advice. Had he been in the South, that may have actually worked. Meanwhile, Kyle proposes a plan to Cartman to spend 30% of the money from the EA Sports deal on building a state-of-the-art orphanage for the crack-addicted babies. And to Kyle's surprise, Cartman agrees. He knows it will generate positive public relations for the CBAA. Look, he's a terrible person, but he knows business. While this is happening, Clyde and Craig attempt to book iconic guitarist Slash for a halftime show at an upcoming Crack Baby fight. But they soon discovered that Slash doesn't actually exist. He's a make-believe character based on a Dutch legend. The various times they've seen Slash have actually been adults in costume, including their own parents, explaining why Slash seemed to be everywhere at once. The boys are stunned by the revelation. When the deal with EA Sports is finalized, the boys are hit with bad news. The contract grants EA Sports full ownership of the CBAA, meaning the company will keep all the rights and profits. Okay, I guess Cartman isn't that good at business. Kyle is devastated by the realization that his plan for the orphanage is dead, but Cartman and the others are still reeling from the revelation that Slash isn't real. Upon returning to South Park, Kyle and Stan are shocked to find that the orphanage has somehow been built after all. When Kyle asks who funded it, they notice Slash's guitar and hat in the corner. This restores Kyle's faith, and he is overjoyed, believing in Slash once again. So now the world has Santa Slash and a host of future drug addicts who hate and will definitely try to kill Cartman. Merry Christmas to us all. Everyone knows Cartman has a power-hungry streak, but how far will he go to achieve it? Well, if the wacky molestation adventure is anything to go by, about 16,000 miles pass too far. The episode begins with Cartman securing 4 tickets to an explicit concert, but Kyle's parents refuse to let him go to something so vulgar. Eventually, Kyle negotiates permission to attend if he cleans out the garage, shovels all the snow from the driveway, and brings democracy to Cuba. Well, he does all of it, but still, they refuse to let him go. I guess Cuban democracy means nothing in this economy. In his fury, Kyle wishes he had no parents at all. Cartman tells Kyle there's a pretty simple solution to the problem. he should call the police and claim that his parents have been molesting him. After practicing his accusation, Kyle makes the call and gets his parents arrested. The boys go to the concert and Kyle hosts a post-show party at his home. Realizing just how free they are without their parents, all of the children call the police on their parents and teachers, until eventually only children populate South Park. Mark and Linda, a couple from out of town, have car troubles on the limits of Smileytown, the new name for South Park. They get help from Butters and Craig to find the nearest phone, which is now in Treasure Cove. You see, South Park has been divided into two halves, but when the couple tries to enter Treasure Cove, they're attacked and sent right back. Craig and the others bring the couple to the mayor of Smileytown, Cartman. Of course it's Cartman. He informs them that a ritual is set to be held that night, and tasks them to go to Treasure Cove and retrieve a book that will force a member of the rival town to be sacrificed. Mark and Linda agree, but when they arrive in Treasure Cove, they're attacked once more and taken to the elementary school, where Stan and Kyle are running things. Stan offers to get them the phone if they agree to help their cause. He tells them all about the before time when children obeyed grown-ups, but now Cartman has used the magic M word to push the adults out, leaving the town struggling to survive without essential resources. He's assumed almost all positions of power, causing major division in the community. Yet there's a hope that the provider will find a way to restore things to how they once were. Mark and Linda agree to get the book from Smileytown, becoming the only two adults not to be accused of twisted things. Meanwhile, the kids' parents are in prison, working through their own alleged sick sexual urges with a counselor, trying to get them to stop all the molesting that they never actually did. Recognizing Cartman's psychotic tendencies, Mark and Linda try to save Butters, who's been chosen for sacrifice. But Cartman threatens to call the cops and tells them that the couple has been molesting the kids. Mark, outraged, tells the kids that their parents are the providers, bringing all the memories back to the kids, who realize it's only been 10 days since the adults left. Cartman is just very persuasive. The kids help Mark call the police, clearing the parents of the allegations. With the parents believing they're cured of the sick sexual urges they never actually had, they reunite with their children. But now the parents, gaslit into thinking they're abusers, act weird. The kids, of course, choose to ignore the whole thing because the problem has resolved itself, which is exactly how the legal system works in South Park. The episode Cartman's Incredible Gift shows us what it looks like when you combine Cartman and a violent serial killer. Well, it's not good. The episode begins with Cartman on his roof, trying to fly using cardboard wings, but because he doesn't believe in gravity, he just ends up in a coma, which is arguably the best place for him. When he wakes up, Cartman discovers he's sharing a hospital room with a victim of a serial killer known for cutting off his victims' left hands, but he has no interest in that. Cartman randomly but correctly guesses the hospital food menu and a few other obvious details, unintentionally convincing Harrison Yates, a gullible and idiotic detective, that he has psychic abilities. Of course, Cartman senses an opportunity for food. In what may well be one of the most reckless police decisions in South Park history, Yates takes Cartman to one of the crime scenes, hoping to get an insight into the case. But of course, Cartman only has so-called visions about ice cream and double-stuffed Oreos. He hopes he will get fed, but instead the police wrongly and violently arrest an innocent ice cream shop owner. Somehow, that's still less reckless than bringing a psychotic kid into a murder case. Cartman loves the attention and uses his newfound abilities to get more innocent people arrested, including a group of rival psychics who feel threatened by Cartman's rise to fame. But even though more and more people are getting arrested, the murders are still ongoing, and Yates, not wanting to admit his mistake, dismisses them as copycat killings. He couldn't possibly be wrong. He has a kid on the case. Yet at every single crime scene, a weird guy named Michael Dietz appears, speaking to a mannequin torso as though it were his abusive mother. It is the reddest of all red flags, yet Kyle is the only one who sees that Dietz is the killer. He gathers real evidence to connect the dots, including fingerprints and blood samples. But the police ignore him because he doesn't have psychic powers. He's just a dumb kid. Realizing that they'll never listen to reason, Kyle goes up to the roof and replicates Cartman's fall, putting him into a coma. When he wakes, Kyle claims to have psychic powers, presenting the police with his evidence. Yates is skeptical, but he investigates Dietz, unaware that the killer has kidnapped Cartman. Furious that this little brat has taken credit for his murders, Yates inspects Dietz's home, finding multiple severed hands nailed to the wall, but he confuses them for right hands because his left thumb points to the left. However, after running a series of wholly unnecessary tests and exercises, Yates realizes that the hand was a left hand, just palm down. They never teach that in Police Academy. He returns to Dietz's house, killing him just as he's about to murder Cartman. All of the wrongly arrested suspects are released, with Kyle praised as the true psychic. But Kyle insists psychics don't exist, that every psychic story has a logical explanation. As Cartman and the rival psychics fight in a psychic battle, Kyle yells at them to stop, his voice mysteriously causing the light bulbs to explode, leaving Kyle confused, but still adamant that there must be a logical explanation, somehow. Frankly, I just want an explanation for why the South Park police aren't fighting to arrest Cartman. Lay a trail of Oreos and he'd go straight in. Cartman is not just a jerk to women, gays, Jews, gingers, minorities, liberals, animals, and cartoon characters. He's also very willing to target the disabled, as in Up the Down steroid. The episode begins with disabled students Jimmy and Timmy set to compete in the Special Olympics in Denver. They ask Stan, Kyle, and the others to support them, but Cartman only sees the event as an opportunity to exploit the disabled, for money. Everything Cartman loves, Cartman decides to fake a disability to win the $1,000 grand prize, embarking on an extreme training regimen, which includes studying how disabled people act, modifying his appearance to look handicapped, and preparing to fake a disability. Despite Stan and Kyle's objections, Cartman is determined to go through with this plan. He's gonna wipe the floor with the disabled kids. Jimmy is approached by Nathan, who offers him steroids supposedly undetectable in drug tests. Jimmy struggles with the pressure of the competition and accepts the steroids, hoping they will give him an edge. But when Timmy discovers the steroids in Jimmy's bag, he's not happy. He tries to tell Mr. Mackey, but because he can only say the words Jimmy and Timmy, he may as well have not bothered. Another reason Stephen Hawking-style technology should be more widespread. Cartman, needing an adult to sign him up, persuades his mother Leanne to take him to the Special Olympics. He convinces her that he wants to understand how disabled kids face their challenges. Moved by Cartman's seemingly sincere desire for empathy, Leanne agrees to take him. But as the event unfolds, Jimmy's steroid use causes significant changes in his behavior. He becomes violent and aggressive, leading to a breakup with his girlfriend and an attack on his own mother. Despite his rigorous training, Cartman realizes he drastically underestimated the strength and capabilities of the disabled contestants, but also he underestimated how overweight and generally lazy he is in life. He finishes last in the competition, while Jimmy, who is now physically enhanced but emotionally troubled, wins first place. Cartman receives a consolation prize of a $50 gift voucher to Shakey's Pizza. But during the award ceremony, Jimmy realizes that Cartman has been pretending to be disabled the whole time. Jimmy goes to attack, but Timmy stops him, forcing Jimmy to realize that he cheated too. Jimmy uses his platform to admit his own mistakes, acknowledging that taking steroids is as dishonest as faking a disability. He returns his medal and gives a heartfelt speech about the integrity of competition, earning applause from the audience. But we should always remember that Cartman lost, because he would want us to forget. Cartman is a loser. Never forget. Cartman tries to claim that his ruse was a lesson for Jimmy about the dangers of steroids. However, the boys see through his deception and dismiss his explanation, leaving a frustrated Cartman to tell them to grow up. Whatever, dude, you still lost. Our next episode, Human Centipede, shows just how far Cartman will go to humiliate anyone who denies his wishes. In this case, his mother and Dr. Phil. But he had it coming. The episode begins with every kid in school owning an iPad, except for Kenny and Cartman, and of course, Cartman hates that. Frustrated by his lack of an iPad, Cartman gets caught pretending to have one. Humiliated by his lack of an iPad, Cartman argues with his mom, who refuses to buy him such an expensive tablet and offers a cheaper alternative, the Toshiba Handybook. The downgrade infuriates Cartman, leading him to publicly humiliate her at Best Buy by accusing her of f***ing him, growing increasingly explicit and aggressive in his totally bogus claims. When Cartman tries to involve the police, his mother finally reaches her limit, refusing to buy him anything and grounding him, even when he tries to play the innocent kid, which, by the way, is not a role that suits him. Meanwhile, Kyle is followed and kidnapped by Apple employees, having agreed to Apple's iTunes terms and conditions without reading them. The agents claim their actions are legal because Kyle agreed to their terms. He's thrown into a cell with a Japanese man and a white woman, both of whom also fail to read the terms. The three of them are revealed to be part of a new Apple product unveiled by Steve Jobs, the Human Centipede, a disgusting human centipede-like device where all three are sewn together, cheek to cheeks, all attached to Apple products. Jobs does everything to get the Human Centipede to walk and read, but Kyle continues to agree to more terms without reading them first. While Kyle is trapped in this nightmarish situation, his father Gerald seeks help at the Apple store. The Apple geniuses tell him that Kyle can't escape his predicament if Gerald, a PC user, signs up with Apple and creates a family account. Gerald reluctantly agrees to switch to Apple to save his son. Good luck ending that contract, buddy. Apple is for life. Your gravestone will be an iPad. Meanwhile, Cartman and his mom appear on the Dr. Phil show, with Cartman publicly accusing his mother of him. The audience sides with Cartman, who's made insane and untrue claims of mistreatment. As a consolation, Cartman is given what he thinks will be an iPad, but it turns out to be the human centipede, which Steve Jobs unveils to the public. Just as Cartman's dream is about to come true, a button that can make someone poop in Kyle's mouth on demand, Gerald and the Apple employees arrive to void Kyle's contract, forcing Jobs to release Kyle and the other two captives from the device. Cartman, furious that his dream has been taken away, angrily curses at God for f***ing him over. In response, Cartman is struck by lightning and ends up in the hospital, battered and bruised. In the final scene, Cartman lies in bed crying, while his mother, unbothered by his situation after all the public humiliation she endured, flips through a magazine. I guess the real lesson of South Park is, don't have kids. There's two things Cartman loves more than himself, dressing up and money, and hurting others. The Tooth Fairy Tats 2000 is an episode that combines all of it. The episode begins with Cartman rushing to give his friends the news that the Tooth Fairy left him $2 for his baby tooth. He suggests that if all the boys pool their baby teeth together, they will have enough money to buy a Sega Dreamcast, but Stan and Kyle have already lost all their baby teeth. Kenny, however, still has some left. He should guard them with his life. Cartman unsuccessfully attempts to forcefully extract one of his own teeth using Timmy's wheelchair, but ultimately he decides it's easier to steal Butter's loose tooth while disguised as the Tooth Fairy. I'm pretty sure he just wanted an excuse to dress up as a pretty little fairy. After successfully swapping the tooth for money, Cartman's mother grows concerned about the number of teeth he's supposedly lost and calls the dentist Dr. Roberts. Worried that he's harming himself, she's forced to admit to Cartman that the Tooth Fairy isn't real. Wait, what? This revelation leads Kyle to an existential crisis, questioning his reality, but Stan is determined to continue the plan to fund the Dreamcast. They plant a tooth under a rich kid's pillow, believing it's the fastest way to profit. But they soon encounter a gang of professional tooth thieves led by a boy named Loogie. Loogie runs an organized racket, collecting teeth from children and leaving notes for parents, and offers the boys a choice: work for him and earn a 2% cut, or have their cut off. They reluctantly agree to join the scheme. I mean, come on, a 2% cut or a 100% cut? It's an easy choice. The American Dental Association, the ADA, becomes suspicious of the disappearing teeth and money. Dr. Roberts speculates that a half-giant chicken, half-squirrel creature is stealing teeth to build a nest, while Dr. Foley insists it's a black market tooth racket, something he once saw in Montreal. But his colleagues laugh off the whole theory, believing Montreal is a fictional place. Foley sets out to prove his theory correct. Not the Montreal thing, that's not real. Canada doesn't exist. Cartman suggests breaking away from Loogie to form their own group and increase profits, but Loogie retaliates by attempting to murder Kenny, the plan that only fails because the river he throws Kenny into is too shallow. Meanwhile, a fake news report airs about a sick child named Billy, who needs $600 for a bone marrow transplant and has recently lost a tooth. The boys plan to steal the $600, his parents will be leaving for Billy, unaware that it's a trap set by Dr. Foley to expose the black market racket. Cartman and Loogie fall into the trap and are caught. Billy, who genuinely needs the money, bad luck, kid. During this time, Kyle's existential crisis deepens, and he momentarily disappears. When he eventually reappears, he alters reality in a way that scares off the police, the ADA, and Loogie's gang. Loogie accepts the downfall of his tooth empire as a good thing and disbands the racket for good. Kenny, still in the shallow river, tries to hop out but eventually drowns when he lands in a deeper part. Timmy passes by on the bridge, joyfully ignorant. Kenny's latest death, of course, is not registered by anyone because there's no way to make money from it, so why would anyone care? Cartman is already a nightmare with no money. How much worse could he be if he was a millionaire? Actually, it turns out he'd want to isolate himself in Cartman Land. Win-win. The episode begins with Cartman inheriting $1 million following the death of his grandmother. Yes, Cartman is a millionaire. Be afraid. Excited by his windfall, he buys North Park Funland, an amusement park intending to enjoy it all to himself, free from long lines and other people. He runs TV ads to brag about how no one, especially Stan and Kyle, will be allowed in. But Cartman's good fortune leads Kyle to develop a stress-induced hemorrhoid, which only worsens as Cartman's happiness grows. After a failed attempt to sneak into the park with Stan, the hemorrhoid becomes infected, leading to a near-death experience and leaving him in the hospital. As he suffers, Kyle denounces his faith, believing God is punishing him for no reason. To be fair, I get it. No decent god would make Eric Cartman a millionaire. After Kyle and Stan's break-in attempt, Cartman is forced to hire a security guard. But the guard insists on being paid in cash rather than free rides, forcing Cartman to let in 2 paying customers a day to cover the costs. Gradually, more problems arise. One of the rides breaks down, forcing Cartman to hire a maintenance worker, and more staff are needed for food and drinks. Each new hire forces Cartman to let more and more people into the park to cover expenses, until eventually the park is fully open to the public, defeating Cartman's original selfish purpose of owning it for himself. Back in the hospital, Kyle watches the news and sees Cartman being hailed as a financial genius, with businesses mimicking his "you can't come" marketing technique to increase demand. This further crushes Kyle's spirit, causing him to suffer heart failure. Even though he's revived, Kyle loses his will to live, believing the universe is unfair and that good things happen to bad people like Cartman. Again, I get it, I'd also wish for death. Meanwhile, Cartman's dream of enjoying the park alone has become a nightmare. The park is crowded. Desperate, Cartman sells the pack back to its original owner, Mr. Foon, for a small profit. But Cartman's joy is short-lived when the IRS takes all his money to cover the taxes he neglected to pay. On top of that, he's sued by Mr. and Mrs. McCormick because Kenny died on one of the park's roller coasters. Cartman ends up losing all his money, owing an additional $13,000. When he tries to buy back the park, Mr. Foon refuses to sell, as the park is now a huge success, and Cartman no longer has any money. Why would anybody go into business with Cartman? Stan takes Kyle to the park, where they see Cartman miserably throwing rocks in frustration. His former security guard sprays him with mace, adding to his agony. Witnessing Cartman's suffering, Kyle regains his faith and recovers instantly, believing that Cartman's misery is proof that there is justice in the world and that God does care. His hemorrhoid, now sentient, goes into remission, and Kyle finds peace in seeing Cartman's downfall. As do we all. Now we come to one of the strangest episodes of South Park. One that even Cartman thinks is one of the worst. Enjoy Towley. The episode begins with Cartman discovering a tampon in the garbage at Stan's house and believing that it's an aborted fetus. I have no idea why that is the first assumption, and I'm afraid to ask. Desperate to keep the boys from ever mentioning the incident again, Stan's mother buys them the latest gaming console, the Okama Game Sphere. The boys are immediately captivated by the Game Sphere and plan to spend the entire weekend playing it non-stop without sleep or interruptions. But just as they settle in, Kyle remembers he's supposed to go to the lake. Before they can figure out a solution, a walking towel named Towley appears, reminding the boys to bring a towel for swimming. When the boys brush him off, Towley asks if they want to get high. After being rejected, Towley walks off silently. Well, at least he recognizes consent. Kyle manages to get out of going to the lake by lying, allowing the boys to continue playing, all faking sicknesses to avoid their obligations and trying to ignore Towley. Their gaming marathon is interrupted when a mysterious man pulls up and asks if they've seen a talking towel. After the boys mention Towley, the man speeds away without a word. When they return home from school the next day, they find their Game Sphere has been stolen, with a ransom note in its place demanding they bring Towley to a gas station to get their game system back. Desperate to retrieve their Game Sphere, the boys mention fake plans to go water skiing to lure Towley out. Once Towley arrives, they grab him and head to the gas station, where an old man thanks them for returning him. But it turns out to be a trap. Never trust an old man who wants a towel, kids. The US military ambushes them, leading to a chaotic shootout. During the confusion, Towley and the boys escape, but the military issues an order to destroy all towels within 1,000 miles. Naked people no longer have any way to hide their business. It's hell if you have eyes. The boys and Towley continue bouncing between the secret military base and the company that created Towley, trying to recover their Game Sphere. But the situation gets extremely bizarre, involving government conspiracies, alien invasions, and evil prototype towels. It's a lot, man. I only have so much time. The point is that the boys remain focused on one thing, getting their Game Sphere back. They express complete indifference to everything else, only caring about their video game. I can get on board with that. Eventually, they retrieve the Game Sphere, but as they're about to start playing, the building they're in begins to collapse. The boys are left dangling over a pit of molten metal, with Kenny falling to his death. Cartman, of course, shows absolutely no concern about the death of his friend. He just wants the console back. An evil prototype towel, the GS401, tries to convince Towley to drop the boys by offering him marijuana. However, Towley resists, grabbing the weed and getting high, which gives him the strength to save the boys. Eventually, the GS-401 falls into the molten metal, and Towley and the boys return home to finally play their game sphere. As they play, it becomes clear that the game's levels mirror the real-life adventures they just endured, including sneaking into secret bases and dodging government agents, though they express far more enthusiasm for the game than they do for the actual events. In the closing scene, a very high Towley admits he has no idea where he is, prompting Cartman to declare, "You're the worst character ever, Towley." Towley, without hesitation, replies, "I know. Harsh, man."